Hello and welcome to another episode of Seddon and Lacey's Comic Stash, and we are back with a top five, and it's
I did
finally
10.
come.
That was 10.
There
That's
was 10.
5. Yeah. Not that any
See,
of us are going to cheat or miscount and get the numbers wrong and end up with 10, are we?
I've never got 10. It was only
No.
6,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and a
See,
long time.
my memory's terrible. I'm never forgetting that, though. I told you I'm never forgetting that, and that's staying in here forever and a day.
And this is a long time coming because it was like episode 8 when we did what we like about villains, and back then we
Yeah.
said we will do a top 5 villains. It's only taken us till now to get round to it, but
It's. And it has taken us like a while to get to, because obviously there's other stuff that comes up. But
yeah,
it's I think and we'll get into this more when we get to list, but I think this is one of the harder ones, and it's really strange to say, isn't it? Because you should be, well, I say you should be, ostensibly the comics are designed for you to kind of root for the hero, but
yeah,
I think one of the things that we've seen massively over the years is really fleshing out these villains, and probably them being the more changed, and keeping those changes. You know, your heroes go through their cycle, don't they, in comic books, where a writer will come along and fundamentally change it, but kind of their job is to put them back to where they were when they left. Whereas I think
yeah.
villains, often you can take liberties with them a little bit more, I guess. So it's probably the one where um it would have the most change over the years. But yeah, you know, who doesn't love a villain?
Exactly. But before that, shall we get in our corners?
Yes, please. Right, corners then. Yours has been quite a bleak corner recently, hasn't it?
It has my reading has not been to its full potential as it should have been, but I do have something to bring to the table. Something that I did start. I did the first 4, 5 issues of is the 2006 Blade Run. Um,
Sorry, I don't know why that made me laugh, but I think if you'd have said pick a dart and throw it with your eyes closed randomly, I think I'd have gone with throw a dart generally in the direction of Blade, and he may well be reading a Blade comic.
yeah, so sticking with I'm getting more in my Marvel stuff in. After you chastising me for never reading my Marvel and never using Marvel, um,
I regret
started
that
the.
now.
So yeah,
At least
started
the
this.
Blade comics are getting a lot more viewing than they have done for a very long time on there. There's someone sat there tracking the stats of Marvel Unlimited going, well, no one's ever read a Blade comic on his app before, but all of a sudden, in England, it's all
Some
kicking
blades are
off.
being read.
Yeah. Yeah, I
uh,
jest. It's a character I love. I jest. We've talked about it before, haven't we? About certainly a lot of love for it for movie. And actually, I haven't really read a lot of the comic books. Not through anything other than probably they've been releasing at times where maybe I wasn't so into buying comics. So yeah, just passed me by. But yeah, big fan of the character, shall we say?
yeah, so this one is not so much a fresh beginning retelling, sort of changing the wheel, but it does start with explanation of how Blade is Blade. Blade is doing Blade things. He's going around, hunting down vampires as you'd expect. Obviously, we get the part that his mum was bit as he was being born, thus how he is the Daywalker. Interesting turn. We get a lot of like flashbacks to when Blade was a kid, and done as in sort of late 1800s, turn of the century time. Um, there's a really cool issue. Like I think
Not
it's
not
issue.
many leather jackets and sunglasses back then. How did he cope?
He was going around with a top hat, slashing
Wow.
victims. Um, you get a really cool little one issue story where Doctor Doom has got God, mine's gone blank on the big bad vampire who's the one who bit his mum.
Um, Dracula?
No, it's not Dracula.
Can't
Um,
remember.
I can't remember. But so he goes to get his mum. He goes for a time thing to go back in time to go and kill or
Oh yeah,
free
because
his
Doctor
mum.
Doom's got a time machine, isn't he? Yeah, like I love that.
To
By the way, I
yeah,
love the how often that's used during the history of comic books. That it's often Doctor Doom's time platform
yeah,
that they use.
because he needs to free her so Doom can get free. But in doing so, it then means that his mum gets eaten because he then has the baby who then becomes the vampire that bites his mum. But yeah, very, very pretty, very, very gory. And I
I'm looking
will
at the covers. The covers look very nice.
do more of it. It's just one
Yeah,
of those of, as I said to you off air, in a bit of a reading funk at the minute. So
yeah, it happens, doesn't it? You know, like there's only so many hours in a day. We have other hobbies, and sometimes you can just kind of punch yourself out a little bit on reading, can't you? And you need a little bit
yeah,
of a gappage from it to find that love again.
and on top of that,
Oh yeah, yeah,
work in the bin.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I do have some time off,
I think
so
that's a solid. I think that's a solid strategy. Let's be honest.
but as I said, I have got a week's holiday coming up. So knowing me doing what you did in a couple of weeks, reading corner, I'll be like just throwing stuff at you.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it depends on what sort of leave you're taking and what sort of leave you've got on. But I mean, I really was in that position of sounds terrible, but I didn't have to do anything. It was great, and so I could read for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours solid if I wanted, or I could read for half an hour, go do something else, come back, and it does, having that freedom of, I guess, no demands necessarily on your time. Um, Although there is the dark side of that, isn't there? Sometimes when you got no demands on your time, you just lay there and a week passes and you go, what happened? I
Yep.
did nothing. But yeah, like I hope you get into the flow. I mean, I've had that recently with TV shows. Like my list of TV shows that I want to watch is so long. But even when I get like a run of maybe sort of 3 or 4 hours where I know I could crack into potentially even half a season of something, I'm not in the mood, or I just can't decide which of the 30 that I want to watch should be at the top of the list. But yeah,
And then
yeah,
you end up starting watching something random on YouTube, and then 4 hours is
yeah.
gone.
Or alternatively, you flick through TV channels and watch something that you've watched 8,000 times before that you didn't really like that much. It was just on telly. So you
Yeah,
just go, yeah, I'll watch this. My other favourite of watching something on a channel with adverts when the Blu-ray is on a shelf next to it. So you could have watched it without the adverts, but you just can't be bothered to walk over and put it in the machine. Yeah,
so,
good
what have
times.
you been up to in your corner?
Well, I've got a couple of quicker hits, and for two very disparate reasons. Pick A or B.
B.
Well, you pick the worst one first, then. So they're two sides of a coin. Very recently, I've been most of the time on the show, I've been talking about Marvel stuff that I've read and a bit of indie, but a lot of my time recently has been going to. I went back to the start of the New 52, so the DC initiative, and I've been slowly but surely working my way through all of the first trades of everything in the New 52, and I've got a long way to go because I tried to break it up with, say, Marvel series and indie ones, and I don't really know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm planning on doing something with it for the channel at some point. So I've avoided talking about any of them so far. However, for a quick hit, I do want to say I've read this week the worst one I've read so far of them, and of course there were 52 new series, so there were going to be really good stuff and there's going to be not so good stuff. But this week I've had the mispleasure of reading Hawk and Dove. Now, in theory, most trades are 5 or 6 issues, but
Mm.
this only ran for 8 issues, so I read the whole 8 issues in one go, and it's an oddity because it starts off with a chap called Sterling Gates is the writer, and he was quite matey. I think he was brought into comic book writing by Jeff Johns, and you can see in this Hawk and Dove series some of the DNA of how Jeff Johns likes to tell a story. So
Mm.
you get introduced to, and I say get introduced, you get reintroduced, which is a terminology that you constantly find yourself thinking when you're reading this new 52 of going, these are just characters that you have seen elsewhere before, but in a new version. But they don't even seem that new. But Hawk and Dove as a partnership, they add in this conceit of there are other, not hawk and doves, but so for example, in this you get condor and swan, and they suggest that there is this thing called the circle, and that
Mm.
there are lots of bird and bird combinations. And so there's a little nugget there of going, okay, where are you going with this? Or are you going to go somewhere interesting with this? One of the big problems I had with it is it's Rob Liefeld drawing it. And it's been a long time since I've read something or where Liefeld's been the penciler. And of course, I go back to the Image boom and the Marvel boom pre-Image. And he was a favourite of mine. But I hate to rag on him, but looking at his panels all these years later, and he hasn't evolved at all.
Mm.
The drawing style is still exactly the same, and or it's a bit rough to watch. Like everyone stands in the same way with that heroic pose. Everything's like a poster, but a poster you'd have wanted when you were a kid in the 90s, rather than
Yeah.
anything that compels. And so I'm laughing when I'm saying this. So the character design for all of the other, and I say all of the other, we didn't see many of them, characters in this circle, is they look exactly the same. They've got exactly the same build, and they're in exactly the same costumes, just different colours. Now, I know obviously like you look at things like Power Rangers and very recently Radiant Black. That is one of the parts of it, is that similar look. But this one really felt like they went, I can't be bothered to design
Just
something new. I'll just draw
completely
the same
phone it
thing
in.
over and over again and get the colorist to put different colors on it. And at the end of issue 5, Sterling Gates leaves the book and it goes to Rob Liefeld in his entirety. So he's writing it and drawing it. And as I say, it only runs for 3 more issues. It wasn't selling particularly well from my memory of the time, but also there were problems. Rob Liefeld had some big problems with DC editorial. But when it ends at the end of issue 8, and it kind of ends with a bit of a, oh, you just wait until you see what Hawk and Dove do next. And I've got a feeling they don't do anything for a very long time, because they kind of go, get that in the bin, leave that over there. But yeah, it felt like I was reading an average to below average comic from the 90s, but I was reading it in and I'm reading it in 2023, which released around 2011, I think was when the new
Yeah.
52 started. But it felt really markedly out of place, and I was, other than a couple of tiny nuggets about what what would this concept have been in maybe another writer and artist's hands, it's pretty rank. It really is pretty rank. So
It,
that's a strong avoid.
as I say, I've never heard of it, and it's not going to go near my list.
No, don't. Like, when sometimes you see what I've been reading like on Twitter or on the Ultra app, don't be tempted by that one. Just go, no. That's the one there not to. And the other one, and this one is going to be uber brief, because you do need to read this at a certain point, and we do need to do a show on it. Not necessarily soon, because it's not available in any of our apps, but I have been tucking into another James Tinian the fourth authored story, and it's probably the one that he is, I guess, most known for at this point, and it's Something is Killing the Children. And this is absolutely fantastic, and not only fantastic, but it's right up your alley. It's a horror, but I would say kind of more in the lines of fun horror. It's not very fun
Okay.
though, so don't expect a comedy here. But like when we read like Nice House on the Lake, that
Yeah.
has a much more dour kind of story to it than this does. it is quite bleak. Kids are getting killed because something is killing the children. But it adds in loads of layers about a mythos around it and why, and the character designs and the art are beautiful. But because I was going to talk about something terrible, I wanted to briefly touch on something good, and I want you to add it to your list of things to have on the radar. I was only going to read the first trade, and I read 4 trades in one sitting because I was enjoying it so much. Wonderful.
Sound it sounds like that's a get on the Amazon and find it on the
Yeah.
cheap.
Yeah, and I think I don't, because it's Boom Studios, and I don't know whether I said to you before, like Image will often have the first issue for free on the Image site to have a read and have a bit of a taster and tester.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Boom do anything like that, but yeah, it might be worth having a look on there just in case they do, because I think knowing how much you've liked his writing as well, I think if you read one issue of this, you go, yeah, I'm definitely having more of this.
Yeah. So, shall we get into our top fives?
Yes.
So,
Uh,
before we
uh,
go into the top five, we shall just, as all top fives, there are rules.
Rules I almost broke this time. I'll confess. I'll
Yes.
confess.
So, the rules are that you can only have one per franchise. Because A, it means that I can't, just have a rogues gallery of Batman villains. So, we did say that there are a few exceptions. So, someone like Kingpin could be counted as a Daredevil villain if you had someone who was Spider Man. So we
Yeah.
weren't knocking Spider Man completely out just because you're having Kingpin.
Yeah, there's certain villains, aren't there, like across the history of it, that have at certain points been very associated with one hero, and at other points as equally as associated with others. So yeah, that felt quite fair, didn't it? To go,
Yeah.
shouldn't tie it to just because they've been, as you say, a Spidey villain. Um, they haven't forever remained a Spidey villain, then they can be moved on.
So, what are your honorable mentions? Because this is where you
So,
can get the ones in that you've got someone else from the franchise in later.
so honourable mentions, I think, is a really hard one for this, because when going through it, and there was 4 that really kind of jumped out at me. One of which I couldn't have, but I there's just so many good ones, and I think honourable mentions could almost go on for an eternity in a day, couldn't it? But 2 that were very close. One of which was in the list but didn't make it, and I guess it gets a spoiler for there's someone from this franchise. But the one that was on the list that I had to remove was Emma Frost from X-Men lore. Now, I was almost trying to justify it to myself of going, well, surely I can have her, because as much as she's in the X-Men, she's not really a villain anymore, because she is part of the or has been part of the team and is now part of Krakoan society and one of the leaders of it. But yeah, it felt too cheaty. But uh, a character that I think has really, and I think some people may disagree with this, but I think really found her own in the comic book universe when Grant Morrison took over the new X-Men and beyond.
Mm.
Had been quite compelling before as a member of the Hellfire Club, and playing kind of an absolute bitch, but probably from that 80s, when Claremont probably brings her in, he probably in her head is designing her off of sort of Joan Collins-esque characters from those sort of things,
Yeah.
of very regal and can hold their own in every situation. But I think it, as I say, when Grant Morrison brings her more into the fold, I think you get to see her more and more and more, and you get to see that combination of how devious and self-serving she can be, but also by the same token, that wider and more fleshed out character, sometimes that deviousness and self-service isn't actually self-service. It is for the greater good of someone she cares about, right, more than necessarily her own personal gain. But yeah, I just think she's one of those villains who lots of writers seem to really like using. Could have
Mm.
easily just been fluff, and I mean that in the horrible kind of way that often female characters were used in there, of going, you're just there to look pretty. But I think with her, writers latched onto this, using her beauty as a tool and realizing that she was actually better than the men who thought they were better than her. And I really like
Yeah.
that. I think she's a grand character for that. And not always been written well, but sometimes she has. And the other X character was going to be Mystique, who I like very much for the that they often went hand in hand in my X-Men reading for villains. I really like the power set. I like the idea of being able to transform into anyone. I love the relationship that they established over the years with her and Destiny.
Mm.
I like the kind of mercenary element of her, but she was a little bit further away from the list. But yeah, if we're ever doing an X Men villains list, two of them that are getting on there. Any strong and I will come back to a couple more, but any strong? Where was at the top end of your honourable mentions that almost made it in?
See, there were two Batman ones that
Oh, good. I
could
want to
have
know what your
been.
Batman ones that could have been, because I want to know whether they're the same as the Batman ones that could have been in mine as well.
So one of them is because he's my boy, and everything that I've seen him in, I love is Mad Hatter because
Okay.
he's just a fun, absolute crazy fellow, and just the riddles and their throwback to Alice Law is I just think he's so well done. The other Batman one that was close is Penguin because of all of the mob boss, crime family boss villains. In all of them, there is only one other that is at the same level of Penguin, who you'll find out later. So yeah, he is for that
He was
archetype.
he
He
was
is
in my Batman villain that didn't make it as well. He was in my list. I like that crime boss. I like what could have been, or probably that was a bit more of a generic character design at the moment, at the time, but how that's been integrated so much into the character over the years, and I think explicitly really well, like for that to become part of his motivation, and when you ever you drive sympathy for him, you'd often drive it off of kids are shits, aren't they?
yeah
And actually, he could have been not who he ended up being if it wasn't for how horrible people can be just because of someone's physical appearance. So yeah, I find him a really compelling character from that side.
and the other two that were close to my list that aren't Batman related, Venom and
Venom.
Thanos. So yes, Thanos misses out on mine, but we all know Thanos was right. Check back to the why we like villains one for a very long conversation on where we thoughts on that one. And Venom, I know now he is now classed as a hero, but he's best when he's a villain.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed. I was gonna say the latest run. That's a lie. It was a Donny Cates run. What I've read of it at the time, but I'm with you. I think for everything that people have done to flesh out normally the human that's inside the symbiote.
Yeah,
Every time I do see it, I do kind of go, I think I'd rather him just being like doing crazy stuff through the streets of New York fighting Spidey, like the eat the brains Venom.
yeah.
I do sincerely, really, really miss that
You
him
know
as a character.
what? Really, because I've read that Venom versus Carnage run, and yes, it's so pretty to watch. Two symbiotes have a massive ruck. But I'd much prefer if them two were tag teaming against like Spidey or something, like causing absolute death and destruction.
I also wonder as well, like, and go back to what I was saying earlier about that hawk and dove, where it's exactly the same picture but just a different color. Comic books have got quite a history, haven't they, of just tweaking characters. So Venom into Carnage, and now and spoilers because it will come up on a reading corner. I'm currently going through Ultimate Carnage, and a lot of it is integrating everyone who's been touched by a symbiote. And bloody hell, there's billions of the buggers. And I think everyone kind of wants to make their own one, but arguably for Carnage, I guess there's some differences there, but so many of them feel like weak knockoffs and
Mm.
potentially done just so that they could. Um, I don't know. Maybe it's just more acceptable to kind of go. It's really hard to merchandise Venom to children if in the comic books when they read him he's eating brains. Let's make him more sympathetic but yeah, I said there's been some really excellent stuff done, but yeah, I like him as a villain more. I just think he's almost perfect as a villain.
So,
I
so
had a
that,
couple. Oh, sorry.
as I say, so that is my honourable list. Do you have any more before we dive in?
Yeah. Just a couple more. So from the Batman Pantheon, Catwoman was close for me. I really like Catwoman. There's another one that I will talk about later, but I'm not going to do it in honourable mentions for the Batman villains. Um, Weirdly enough, like these two all in my mind fought it out because at one point I was going to have the Red Skull in. I quite like the idea of a Nazi villain. I think it's very easy to do. No one likes the Nazis apart from those people who do, and they're wrong. But no one likes the Nazis, so I do think it's a very good villainous character to have. But when I was thinking about it, I actually went. No one clipped this bit, but he's my second favorite Nazi villain, and there's actually a Nazi villain I like more, and it's her star from Preacher, and I like her style more because he kind of leans into Nazi, but over the course of the comic book, he goes through some really calamitous stuff, but you never feel sympathy for him because he's just a prick. He always will be a prick. But he actually gets kind of less, and I use the term Nazi, like he's more linked to like that's where his proclivities come from, but he's linked to the religious organization that's pushing the story forward, etc., etc. But
Yeah.
effectively, it's a Nazi by another name. But yeah, I really like that archetype. I like the clear villain, as in there's no redeemable features here.
Yeah,
There's no
there's
like tell me a sympathetic story about this Nazi. It's like no, good guy, get him. He's bad.
yeah.
And I know you mentioned Mad Hatter. He wouldn't have made my list, but obviously, I've got to add in the ventriloquist whenever Hatter's mentioned as a bit of a love. Um, the final one that potentially made the list, and I actually carved him off at one point. He was on the list was from Invincible, which is Nolan Grayson, which is Invincible's dad, Omni Man. Um, and he didn't make the list. I'm not going to go into why because it's very spoilerific, but an amazing character. And in another day, in another universe, he might have made my top 5 villains.
Because I still need to read more of that.
Exactly, and that's why he's not on my villains, nor is the why he's not on my villains mentioned here because I don't want to spoil any of it for you.
So I will start with number 5.
Number 5.
And we're going massive. We're going world eating. We're going Galactus.
I did wonder, like, I did. I didn't know where you were with Galactus. Is the honest truth. I don't think we've ever really spoken about him, so I
Hmm.
didn't know like whether he was I say big villain. Obviously, he's a big villain. He's bloody massive, but I didn't know whether he's a big villain for you.
So usually I don't like this sort of overpowered mega boss sort of villain. I usually like someone that's got a bit more to them. With Galactus, especially because of reading all those early Silver Surfer stuff and that, he is the ultimate end level boss to me for Marvel. Yeah, he is, as we say, fucking massive.
Yeah,
He consumes worlds, and so it is that thing of like he is that perfect villain for we've got an Avengers story, we've got an X-Men story, or we've got a we're putting everyone together story. You're fighting him, and it will always look amazing on the page. It is. Yeah, is he the most in depth and meaningful of villains? No. Does he have a forgiving backstory? No. But he is the best of the mega bad, the mega boss.
See,
And
I wonder whether partly this is because of like your own kind of reading experience, how much you've read of it. I he didn't make my list, and one of the reasons why he didn't make my list is the abject opposite of what you just said of like his story. And he didn't make my list because for me he's not a villain, because his backstory and kind of how they've fleshed that out is so good now that I don't consider him a villain anymore. I consider him a force of nature more than a villain. And
okay,
like
I
that's where a lot of writers have kind of lent to of going, he's not coming to Earth just to go nom 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 I eat Earth. But he is coming to Earth to go nom 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 I eat Earth, but not because he dislikes Earth people and any of that. It's just that is his role in the universe, is to consume planets to feed himself, but effectively because he's almost like I describe it as a sub deity now. That it would be like us going, don't look where you're walking at all times in case you tread on an ant. And I think that's why, for me, he kind of has moved away from in my mind as a
yeah
concept as a villain and more of a he's still a peril, don't get me wrong, and as you say, people have to come together to solve like when when we do get in the way, but it's less because of anything other than, as I say, like I go back to that ant thing of going, would I consider you a villain if you trod on an ant? No. Do I consider Galactus a villain for consuming a planet? Even though I know that's much more extreme, but effectively in his world, no, because
yeah.
that's what a planet is.
So yeah, so obviously I clearly have much more modern reading to do with him because I've said the only time, all the times I've read Galactus, it is just a I consume, I take
Yeah,
because I
but I
am.
think that's where writers kind of picked up on that from of going, and bravo to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee for coming up with like that initial concept that I built off. But I think you are right that he is the I take because I am. But I think where that's kind of been fleshed out of going even more so I take because I am, and there's no motivation behind it other than um, existence for him.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think an amazing character. Like I do, I hats off to you putting him at number 5. And as I say, I think if I thought of him as a villain still, he'd have had a damn good chance of making my top 5 villains as well.
yeah. So what is your number 5?
So my number 5, funny enough, you mentioned it earlier as one of the ways that rules can be interpreted is Kingpin. And I know you share my love for this. I love a crime boss. I, part of that is because if you have crime boss stories, they bring goons. I love goons in my
Fodder.
comic books because I think it allows for the heroes to do hero-y things, but without and let's use like a wrestling parlance here, without jobbing out all the people so that you then never want to see them fight at that villain again. It's
Yeah,
just like faceless, nameless masses effectively that they can go through. But then having the person at the top, you sort of said about kind of M bosses. This is almost a street level M boss, isn't it? Of going, they will be pulling the strings and character design again. Like his look he's big man. Like,
yeah,
but and they've kind of shown that big manness to help him have super strength, be very resilient. Like if someone stabs him with a knife, they ain't getting to an organ, are they? So
no,
it allows him to kind of sustain. But despite the fact that he has always been a crime boss, and of course, in any story with crime bosses, you will have times where he's at the height. He will also have falls, rises, falls. In this many years of publication, you're going to have that. But one of the things that made him hit my top 5 is I've never tired of him. I think whenever they bring him back, even though the path might be very similar. I want to see him go through that path, and I like
Mm.
him being the top crime boss. And his versatility really shone out for me. And why it was one of the rules is for decades being linked with Spidey, and then moving him into certainly when Frank Miller comes across, moving him into the Daredevil pantheon, but really moving into the 1970s gangster, the darker side of him. Fantastic, like kind of chef's kiss on that stuff. But then, let's say 15 to 20 years later, being able to quite equally shift him back into a storyline where he becomes the mayor of New York and can fit back into Spidey. I just think he's massively versatile. And as ever, I look for in my villains for them to be bad. I want them to be bad. They are villains, but also to have some things that I can hang on to. And his relationship with his wife and his desire, and a lot of his desire of almost going, I'm a bastard, except for in this one part of my life.
Yeah.
It makes them feel more human to me. But yeah, I absolutely love the Kingpin. Can't wait to see more of him. He's one that I love seeing on the big screen as well, or
Mm.
the little screen, whatever it is, because I think he is one of those. When they were doing the Daredevil TV show on Netflix, moving him into that medium, perfect. I think that's again the beauty of him is that he sits snugly in comics, he sits snugly outside of comics as well.
So my four is also
Number
Mr. Fisk.
4. Ah,
Um, Obviously, for me, it is more his Daredevil stuff and even some of the Punisher stuff, especially
yeah,
like
forgot
some of the
Punisher.
Punisher
So
runs,
yeah,
um, more than the Spider-Man stuff for me. But you're right, he is that guy that is the ultimate bastard, but he'll do what he needs to who he needs to get himself ahead. Whether it be to become the mayor, whether it be to, take over some land so he can build some new houses and then, rip people off with rent or smash it all down to build a new tower.
yeah.
He is, other than, as I said, other than Penguin, the best mob boss character of that trope.
It's partially
And
why Penguin, like not even kind of comparably to Batman, but I went kind of if I'm going crime boss, Kingpin just kind of beats him for me. And not to be mean to like the Penguin, but yeah, Kingpin is I think just that couple of echelons higher than Penguin for me in a similar role.
I, I think the thing with him over Penguin is that I don't think you could put Penguin in with the other Marvel or other DC heroes and him be effective because they've got superpowers and stuff, whereas
Yeah,
Batman doesn't. Whereas the fact that Kingpin has, obviously he isn't. Oh, look at him! He's got these superpowers, but he is
he can hold
mega
his own, can't
strong.
he? Yeah,
He
yeah.
is mega big, and he's a fucking badass. He can hold
Yeah,
up
it's
with
not
a
it's not the
Daredevil.
hero swoops in one punch Socko is out, is he?
Yeah,
He can go toe to toe with most heroes that he would be facing.
so yeah, but yes, I too have a lot of love for Mr. Fisk, and
And again, I
yeah,
mean, like not quite there, but just under 60 years of published, and always a caveat of obviously not every story told with these characters is good, but I think the amount of good stories told about him or with him in it, and sometimes like the fact that he's for large periods of time in Daredevil, in Spider Man, as you say, in some of the Punisher runs, he's just forever looming. Like
yeah,
sometimes the stuff's just going on around, but Kingpin is the top dog. He might not be the focal point of the story, but you know that he's in charge of everything that is actually going on under him. But yeah,
there.
amazing to keep that going for that long.
It's gonna say there's one of the Punisher runs I was reading last year where he's mentioned in the first issue. He's mentioned by character in the sixth issue of the run, but all the way through it, because this is the point when he's running to become mayor, you just see
Yeah,
in one of the backgrounds of a panel vote for Fisk. So
Yeah.
you always just getting that he's always there sort of vibe going on, and yeah,
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that because like, a lot of the stuff I'm reading at the moment, I kind of went to, and we talk about eras. Like I'm reading a lot of the Marvel Fresh Start era when a lot of things were kind of I say rebooted. They weren't rebooted, but just new number ones with new creative teams. And yeah, it's just kind of post him becoming mayor. And yeah, you're right. You just see in the background like pictures of him as mayor, or there'll be a news report running on the TV talking about him doing mayor stuff. And yeah,
yeah.
really great.
So what is your number four?
So my number four is. But actually, before I say what it is, this is the one that is on my list that has been used in a medium other than comic books. And I will say, although this might be debatable when I come to later, but I really hate the version of it that was used outside of the comic books.
Okay.
I love the comic book amazingly, and it's the Governor from Walking Dead. I do not like the governor in the TV show, and it's where I stopped watching the TV show. But I think the truth of it is I dislike the version of it in the TV show so much because I loved the version in the comic book so much. And this is early-ish on, although I guess is there such a thing as early-ish on in the comic book run. But we meet the governor when, let's say, our band of heroes have been through some things, met some rougher groups of people who might not be quite so friendly, and even had some traitorous intent from within. But they've kind of had a nice little run of it where, I say nice little run of it, in a zombie apocalypse where they're kind of tottering along and they meet a new group of people, and one of these being the governor. And he's called the governor because effectively he runs a community, and a community that is ostensibly looking like it's doing okay, or as okay as you're going to do in a zombie apocalypse. And through the story, he you get to see that he is unhinged, and
Mm.
certainly more unhinged than he initially seemed. He keeps lots of heads in jars, dead heads, but heads in jars and things like that. He quite brutally beats up one of the main characters, and effectively, or I always read it as raped her. So again, horrible stuff. And you see in this community that when you're first introduced to it, looks kind of okay. Some of their sport is kind of having almost gladiatorial human beings fight zombies, but effectively the good guys escape. Our heroes escape, and they move on with their life. They do, and they set up, and they have this beautiful setup where they're living in the prison, which again is in the TV show,
Yeah.
but it's almost that part of a story where you kind of go, oh, is this it? You kind of know there's always a zombie threat, and you assume that there's going to be a zombie threat at some point, but they're getting places, and then the governor comes back, and the governor attacks them, and I'll avoid the spoilers, I won't do it, but does the most heinous act I've ever read on a comic book page. Like it absolutely, and I've probably seen more heinous acts since now, but it's the bit where after years and years and years, I guess, of being used to more superhero-esque villains doing superhero-esque villains things,
Mm.
him doing something that actually, when I read it, I was like, I was rocked. I kind of went, and he stays with me to this day, and he stays with me because I think he reminds me of he was. I know they use the term governor, but he reminds me. He makes me think of what a politician would probably be like in the zombie apocalypse. But yeah, I just think amazingly compelling, and also massively integrated to a story, and a story that led my comic reading in a different direction. So yeah, massively powerful for me for that reason. So makes my number four top villain of all time. Bastard that he is.
Yes. So my number three sits quite nicely on the you're doing a good thing, but your methods are a bit questionable. Magneto. He was right, but sometimes you can't do it that way. Um, obviously I haven't read anywhere near the level of X-Men that you have. But so this is mostly off the limited reading, but a lot of the TV show from the cartoon from the 90s. Uh, Magneto clearly is Malcolm X, and questionable ways of doing it. But he's doing the right thing to end segregation and the downtrodden of mutants by mutants. And this is one of those of where you sympathize with him and his cause, but you just like you can't do it like that. It's just that oh,
Yeah,
but one of those of for an X Men and because they're going again with Xavier as well, them sort of being yin and yang of power balance as well
yeah. It's a
is
compelling
perfect. It's
story,
not,
isn't it?
yeah,
Having rather than and apologies when we're doing a top five. I'm going back to Hawk and Dove again. Rather than going the opposite is because they wear a different color and are probably a bit meaner. Actually having very similar desires for what the outcome would be, but polar opposite ways of getting there.
yeah. But so even like in the power structure of like what each of their powers is their mutant power, similar but different. So obviously Charles can listen into people's thoughts, sort of bend their will to his way with his brain, and then you've got Magneto who could use his brain to cause destruction by grabbing everything that's metal and throwing it at you.
Yeah,
It they are just as a pairing, literally being just the two sides of the same coin is what makes these two work so well together. But as I said, it's just they're both doing the same thing, and it's the right thing,
yeah.
but it's the wrong way.
It's how
And
you get there. Yeah,
yeah, but yeah, no, as I said, it's one of those of with X Men. I'm always very, as I've said many times when you bring X Men up, I'm very daunted by the fact of how many different titles, runs, and things that are all going on at once to jump
yeah,
in. But it is with that run of villains that they used for the 97 cartoon, which is pretty much the giant X-Men sort of period and
yeah.
sort of around that.
Yeah, kind of
Those,
like is the potted highlighted history of that whole Claremont run up to um the like the Marvel boom of X-Men. So they do pick and choose. Let's go with to the most part the best of the stuff from
yeah.
there. So yeah, you are getting a reasonably good view of what's grand.
But yeah, it is that thing of like he is definitely one of those villains that compels me to want to read more X-Men because of
The
you
power
know
of Magneto compels you.
I stand with Magneto. Magneto was right.
Yeah.
So what is your number three?
So my number three is Doctor Octopus. My first and I guess only because we're only allowed one Spidey villain to make the list. And so first things first about Doctor Octopus, I really like the visual of him. You know how we said when we were saying about honourable mentions about Penguin. I think he's got a very striking visual, a striking visual that could and probably at certain points has been maybe used as a figure of fun, but
Hmm.
it leans into um, unexpected things from and let's I'm going to use the term packages from but people if you look at them you wouldn't necessarily, and I think that being a big driver of his character, some of that villainy and that hunger to be recognized, revered, come from the way he was treated because of the way he looked, and then to extend that into the octopus arms, and of course, like the conceit of the story is that they were being designed for a practical function, and of course, when you are uh, what would be Lee and Ditko at the time, when you're creating a character called Spider-Man and you're trying to plumb out the villains, of course, a load of that first run were other animals.
Yeah,
But rather than being in an octopus costume, like and looking really daft, I think he's got a really striking visual look. And again, I go back to 60 years plus of publication, and I've never got fed up with him. And I think where he slightly differs to me from the Kingpin in how and why he's lasted as long for me is I think he's fluctuated much greater. So when
mm.
I said like Kingpin might fall from the top of the mountain and have those rough couple of years as he works his way back up. I think even from a conceptual and a comic book writing time, there's been time where Doctor Octopus has just been a throwaway character. Like almost in some people's minds, I think a Z-list one, like villain of the week, gets beaten up quickly,
Yeah,
and then in other writers' hands, he's been used as the kind of main compelling threat. And I go back to versatility. I think he's massively versatile. I think he can be those things, and I think where in the hands of smart writers is if maybe he's been off of let's say a couple of years of being mistreated, if you call it that, they actually integrate that into why possibly he's more of a threat next time you see him because he actually feeds off of that fact that maybe he become the loser he did. And
yeah,
if nothing else, I loved the character anyway. And then I get to when Dan Slott is writing Spider-Man. He had a massive long run, and this one I am going to go into spoilers for. I don't know whether you even know this yourself. So I don't think you've ever read any of this stuff, but part the way through this run, Doc Ock is dying. He's dying, and this is going to sound, I guess, quite daft for when you're hearing it cold, but he swaps minds with Spidey, and when I say swaps minds with Spidey, they run that for about 4 years, where it's Doc Ock's brain inside Spidey's body, and you get to see what Doc Ock would do if he had the body of Spider-Man, but in a
yeah,
really good way, as in like he's not just I'll eat to get myself to me figure and I'll put Doc Ock comes. He actually tries to use his brain power, use his skill set to be, and the run's called Superior Spider-Man because not only does he get to live on, but this is also his chance to show that he was always superior to Spider-Man, and
yeah,
again leans into that character that he is of actually being super smart and being really really competent, but can never get out of the way of his own frailties, and those frailties generally feeling like he's inferior to other people. But oh yeah, like a character who I think you can jump in anywhere in 60 years, but if you're going to jump in anywhere, get yourself some Superior Spider-Man. It's beautiful to read.
that may be getting added to the list because that sounds a really
Yeah,
good concept.
it is. It is. And again, it could have seemed so bad, like you got the brain swaps,
Yeah.
but it's done in such a great way. Like
So my number two
number twosies.
is Loki. One of those villains that can be used so easily in any way that they need him to. He's very moldable to what they're trying to do, especially obviously with the four stuff, but even outside of four. Um, Obviously has equal powering of four because he is also a god. There's that will they won't they sort of brotherness as well, which is always there with four. I don't want to beat the shit out of my brother.
Yeah,
Or you being a dick, and they do so much with him. You do get runs where in some lesser right hands they play more off the mischief part, not for an intelligent way of how he's using that to get what he wants, but just as a laugh. But a
having a
lot of the time,
laugh.
they do so well with him. With he will have something that he wants to do, whether it be taking over a planet, taking over a fucking realm, even becoming a mayor. Because there's one of the runs that I read that he takes over a city in Asgard, and then ends up trying to go to then become president. But he does it all with mischief and nasties in there, and you're just like, you are the perfect politician at these times. So throwback to a bit like Kingpin is, but at the
Yeah.
same point, he's also a nasty fuck, and is because of the mischief and because of the frivolity they do with him. You will sort of go in underestimating that he can hold his own, and then
You
when he
said
wants
about
to,
you said about his brother. So like
yeah,
I think again it's quite a key thing of like he's off going to be underestimated because he's standing next to the golden haired god with rippling muscles and the hammer. And I know the visuals have changed over years, but quite often it was him in green with the what could be described as stupid kind of horned helmet on. And yeah, so
yeah.
I think you're spot on with that. Um, uh, Oft underestimated.
But yeah, it's one of those of you can, and because of, as I said, with the comedy side and the nasty side, he can and is used so well sort of across the spectrum as well. So he's not one of those of when you see him in a story, you go, we know what we're going to get because it's Loki, like you can with some villains. If you get Kingpin, Penguin, you know it's going to be a mob type thing. There's going to be a shit ton of goons they're going to bash through. If you get Two Face or Catwoman, it's going to be a robbery, or there's going to be the split decision thing. Lex Luthor is going to be, he's coming in with kryptonite. Certain villains will always have that same MO. With Loki, you can go anywhere with him, and that, when done well, is always really fun.
Is it strange you say that? Because that's why he didn't make my top five. Because I think he's one of the most mo villains. You know exactly what you're going to get with Loki. He's going to betray the hero. Whatever he's telling you isn't true, and he's going to stab them in the back. And don't get me wrong, in great writer's hands, I've seen it done amazingly. I think potentially because of the world that he played in for many years.
Mm.
Um, for many years in Thor, I think there was some not so great Thor stuff until you get to like the Walt Simonson area, era rather than area, um, where I think he really starts to come into his own. And he's the forefather of the Avengers. Like without him, there would be no Avengers. Like he's the one who, his machinations do it. But then again, possibly because of creative teams, they've then done that to death over the years. I love when they did Kid Loki, brilliant spin on it. I love when they did Lady Loki. I loved you said about that running for kind of president. Also recently, when I was reading, or recently for me, when I was reading the Donny Cates run of Doctor Strange, he has a run at Sorcerer Supreme. I think they've done some fantastic things with him where they've made him sometimes sympathetic, a bit more of a rounded, almost sometimes human feeling character. I think there's been some great stuff, but I do go back to if Loki's appearing in the comic book, he's going to just stitch them all up. Might be a bit more interesting how he gets there, but I rarely see when that doesn't happen, and when it doesn't happen, I think they spend so much time going that by the end of it, when he doesn't do it, I go, I just wish he'd rather have done it now. We could have got this over and done with quicker. And I don't want it to be like a damning thing. I do really enjoy him, but yeah, I actually think he's oft more one trick pony than not one trick pony, if that makes sense.
Mm. So I do know a lot of the earlier stuff. It was very much he turns up. He's gonna. He stabbed you in the back.
Yeah.
But it said a lot of the stuff that I've read has been the last sort of 20 years of bits where I don't think they go on that as much as
I, I mean,
they
I'd still say
often used to.
yes in that last 20 years, unless they're trying to do one where they're trying to make him into more of a sympathetic hero. I'd say they lean into that like as much. I can't think of a story where he's been the villain where ultimately it hasn't been stitched you right up, didn't I? I but my other slight issue, if I'd say, and why he didn't make my top five is hugely overexposed in the last since the Marvel movies. Hugely overexposed for me. I don't feel like I could go a year without Loki being in multiple series and doing Loki things, and that's fine. But yeah, I just think for me, um, uh, I just said the same thing for Venom. I think Venom has become massively overexposed to where I said to you I started reading the Jason Aaron Avengers run recently, and
Mm,
the story starts because it's an Avengers story. So Loki almost is effectively the reason why the Avengers reforming this. But at the same time, I'm reading concurrently the Thor series where Loki's in there doing Loki things. Is he stitching his brother up? Is he not stitching his brother up? He's appeared in another series that's running concurrently, and I can see why, because he sells, because he's very popular. But I think he's just in recent years, probably the last 10 to 15 years, for me, he's been overexposed to the point where I less want to see him on the page.
mm. Yeah, I suppose 'cause I've only sort of done it in like the four stuff. It's not been seeing him in Avengers or seeing him in other people's stuff as well. That obviously I'm
Yeah,
not seeing him being rammed down as
yeah.
much and turning up in everyone else's shit just because he's the one that's got the films going on. So what
He's the
is
villain
your
equivalent. He's the villain equivalent to Wolverine. Wolverine will appear as a guest star in multiple issues because we know they know it sells, and I think he's almost become that as a villain in recent time for me, which is to
yeah?
say is a shame. But I understand why. But yeah, just a little bit overused for me currently.
So what is your number two?
Funny enough, shares a common theme with my number three because there's another Doctor in the house. My number two is Doctor Doom. I we talked before on the Origin show. It's on the channel. When I got into reading comics, I got into reading comics during Secret Wars as an event, and in Secret Wars there are a plethora of villains, but I would say over the course of the season, the villain that comes to the fore, and the main villain is Doctor Doom. I had some exposure to him from cartoons and things like that before, but like sticking entirely with the comics, so he's probably the first big villain that I saw, and I was fascinated by him, and it made me want to read more Doctor Doom. Now I think to the most part, it was the visual. I think when
He
I
is
look at my
stunning.
list of when I look at my list of villains, I think he's got the most visually pleasing look for me, and kind of best design. There's something cool about armor, and I think the way that it's coloured, like the kind of the metallic and then the green. So visually, always really liked it, but they do establish in that story, and that's before going back to the origin, like he's scarred underneath, and actually a big part of that story is he heals himself. And despite having only a very limited, i.e., about 6 issues worth of experience of this character, one of the bits of the story was he's going to take off his mask. I rushed home from school that day because I knew the issue was releasing. That's how impactful it was for me.
Yeah,
But obviously, when I read more, uh, he's birthed out of the early days of the Fantastic Four and the early days of Marvel, and a lot of what I know of him and his character is added in later. Reading those early Fantastic Fours, it's a little bit kind of less fleshed out there, but he is that scientific rival to Reed Richards. So he is, you said about Magneto and Professor X. I think slightly less yin and yang, a much more basic version of it. But effectively, an experiment goes wrong because he's arrogant and wants to prove that he's better than Reed, and that scars him. And then those scars lead him to then go down further routes to try and heal himself. But he gets the metal mask, and over the years, certainly early doors, so much of it is about he's a man who can't get out of the way of himself, super smart, but his drawback is always that thing within him. And it's not that he will always make a mistake, but he's so determined to prove that he never makes a mistake that's what leads to the mistake. And then on top of that, you layer in what they then did to flesh him out is they talk about his history and his mother, and his mother soul is owned by Mephisto. So in later years, you get this mystical element, and a lot of his driver is he is doing villainous things, but actually he's doing it because he wants to rescue his mother's soul because he doesn't want her kind of burning for eternity. And possibly the thing I like the most is he rules Latveria. He has his own country, and I go back to what I said about Kingpin. I think I like my villains to have a power set. And when I say a
Yeah,
power set, not like the powers they use, but this organization under him. And what's bigger than having someone be a ruler of a country? And I think it allows them to tell some very smart stories because, yes, he is a villain, but in some of those stories, when a really smart writer comes along, actually no, he's doing what any leader of a country would do. So when someone comes through the borders, let's say it's the FF, because generally it would be, they're chasing down a villain and they come in his borders, he locks him up. And it would be really easy to go, oh, look, a villain just doing a villain things. No, that would be the same as if we sent an invading force into another country to
yep,
get something we wanted. You can't do that. And within that, there have been times where they've shown him as like a really effective leader who loves his country and wants Latveria to be good. Other times they've leaned into kind of ruling with the iron fist, and actually they're not doing so well. But because you've got all of these multifaceted parts of him, I think it makes him a massively compelling character, and it gives you so many avenues to go down with him as a villain. But yeah, I come back to give me villains that run countries and things like that. Give me villains where I can go, I buy into why what you're doing. I wouldn't do it that way, but I understand almost a somewhat sympathetic reason for it being done. But
yeah.
keep them as a villain though, because he is a villain. But yeah, Doctor Doom, fantastic.
Yeah, that's it. I've read a few bits with him. I'm not anywhere near again with how much you have, but he's always cool. He's
Yeah,
one of those. He's always really cool, and it's a
arrogant
either
bastard as well. Like
yeah.
I like that about him. You know, like he is absolutely he's better than you, and he knows it. To quote the master of wrestling, MJF.
And yeah, visually, yeah, not changed a lot since the beginning, but
No,
it doesn't need
and you
to
can see why.
because
Yeah, you wouldn't want to. Like every now and again, like in a story, and um, probable spoilers for Marvel Phase 7 or whatever the phase is when this ends. Because I do think he will be the main villain of this part. I think he will be the Thanos. Um, but because I think it's like links into a story. But at one point, he starts wearing a white cape rather than green. I was just like, wow, this is amazing. But he just changed cape color. But it was somehow amazing. It was fantastic. But yeah, love him.
yes. So my number one,
Number one's
in a
is
surprise to no one, the Joker, and
who? Never
water
heard of
is
him.
wet.
Never heard of him. Who is he?
Just a clown goes around
Yeah.
smashing skulls, murdering
So
people.
what is it? And I know we've covered. I know we talked about Joker a lot, but let's get down to the brass tacks of this. What is it that you find so compelling about the Joker? What is it that, like, I guess, floats your boat about him and villainy?
So with Joker, I as much as I love a villain with a cause, i.e., like Magneto and Thanos, I love crazy. I love unpredictable. I love someone that, as a character base, you can do anything with, and there is no borders. There is no sort of hard line of how far would they go. Um, you know, if you so one of the big ones, I know it was partially done because us as humans are a disgusting, horrible species, but when given the option of killing Jason Todd or not killing Jason Todd, the general masses said kill him. So they went with Joker going full fucking batshit and smashing a skull with a crowbar. There are very few.
Does that not make us the worst villains or the best
Yes,
villains? Yeah.
but this is the thing. Joker is, in a way, in all of us of what if we sort of were there at the end of work. You've got to Friday. You've had the worst week in hell, and you have no worry about being arrested or sort of moral compass at that point, and you just snap. What would you do? Because Joker would do that, and it is in that for me, I'm like, there are many times that I'd be like, I could go full Joker on The Office right now. Just go nuts.
For anyone that's watching this that works with Chris, hide.
But it is that as a character and as a thing you can do that with, and the evolution of him from the beginning to now obviously mirrors society as well, because you think 30s 40s Joker when he is a, basically a clown that's using clown tricks to rob.
Yeah.
then
It's the
then
crime capers in a
yeah,
get up, isn't it? Like, yeah.
yeah, then you've got the sort of 70s where it starts getting a bit darker, but it's still very much I am the clown prince, and it's all sort of fun and games, but underneath that shooter duck is a bomb instead of it being, I've got a gun that just says bang, and look, I've got a little flag on it. And then you get to sort of the 80s, the 90s, and keep going further on, is where it gets proper dark, and it really is a reflection on humanity in a way of what is that level of depravity, what is that level of evil and violence that can be there, but all the time there's always the comedy or the fun part to it to go, but it's okay. What's that? You want me to smash your skull in? I'll do it while I'm smiling. Because that juxtaposition of this nasty act, but I'm a clown. And yeah, it is that thing. Is just he can be done in so many different ways and through the eras. And you look at my pops. I've got 66 Joker. I've got Jack Nicholson. I've got Hugh.
Fucking love. I
You know,
love the '66 Joker, by the way.
but
I like.
that's
Yeah.
but that's the thing. That character is so moldable that you can do those three different takes on him, but he's still always Joker. There's no, that at any time you could have a run of issues where he does anything in that gambit of things, and it will fit that character. And yeah, it's just one of those. I think to me, because he is as moldable to society that he can go as dark as humanity goes, or it can be as fun loving and happy as humanity can go. It is the one villain that is a reflection on us.
I was going to jump into something else, and I will come back to it. Um, I can he be fun loving? Question mark. Because you said that a few times, and I don't think he can.
See, you do,
Now that is sorry, like now, like
yeah.
I
I think
think I think we've laid onto it so much over the years that I don't think he can be anything but abhorrent now. Like I don't think I could read a story where like it lent into probably where he was in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I think lines have been crossed with that character now where I don't think I could read a story which was tempered back the other way. I have an expectation now with him, and that expectation is driven by, I guess it has to be dark now, and I think there's also a bit of, and this is more to do with the writers maybe than the characters, but a
mm,
bit of a trapping of top that, and if it ain't worse than what you did last time, then eh.
I guess there is a, you know, call back to a wrestling thing of I can do a 450, I can do a 680, I can do a
Yeah, yeah.
900. There is that top that thing there. I have seen some newer stuff with Joker where they don't go full dark on there, but it's because you can do sort of mini runs and stuff where it's not full 66 pow style, but it is still a bit more lighter than
But I
the
wonder,
crazy that we do get.
and again, it might just be a personal thing for me, but I don't think I want to read that Joker anymore. Like, as in, I think I want to read Killing Joke and Beyond Joker, and the really standout stuff that's been done with Joker. You know, like the thing that I was going to pick up before I asked, like, can he be fun loving? Is one of the most compelling things about the Joker for me is. We've said this about a few of the villains on this list is the yin and yang of him and Batman. For Batman being justice and order, he is the agent of chaos. He is the absolute opposite of the way that Batman acts, and I think it makes such a good hero villain combination because Batman's the greatest detective, and a lot of his villains changed over the years, but a lot of his villains they have a goal, and that goal being something that like us as the reader or Batman as a detective can kind of figure out. So you said like
Yeah,
Catwoman's going to burgle, might have like a somewhat altruistic or not too horrendous reason for it, but that's her primary purpose, and stop that, and you've kind of stopped it. Whereas Joker more often not didn't have a purpose. That his purpose is having no purpose, and
chaos.
yeah, and I really think that that is fantastic. And as I say, one of the most compelling parts of it. I also think potentially it's one of the most limiting parts of it because I don't want to see him very often. And
Uh,
spoilers, he doesn't make my list. And when I said there's an honourable mention that I'm not going to mention till we get to it, I knew he'd be your number one. He would have
yeah,
been on my honourable mentions list. And I think um, for all of the great Joker stories, and I think there are some amazing great Joker stories. I want to see him very very sparingly now. And if anything, to be honest, probably the truth is I don't want to see him at all in continuity unless it's probably 6 to 10 year gaps because I think if used too often, I think he loses his specialness.
yeah. Um, I said recently there he is the go-to for specials. So obviously we did a show on it recently with Free Jokers.
Yeah, that
There's
didn't help.
obviously,
That didn't help in making my top five.
but you've got like Joker's War. There's the Joker that stopped laughing. They are doing lots of
Got his own series
him
though as
on his
well.
own.
So
Yeah, and
yeah,
so there's sort of, oh, we want to give someone a special, or someone's doing a special here. Joker, go. He is one of those that is definitely overexposed, but would DC take that risk of shelving him for 2 years, 3 years
And I think
without?
often that comes down to the creative teams. I think a lot of creative teams come on and probably go, I want to tell my Joker story. Because I think
Yeah,
most, like, if you are sitting there and you really want to write comics and you want to write DC comics, let's go. I don't think there's many writers who don't have a Joker story or go, oh, can't wait to write a Joker. So I understand like the really compelling bit of it. I think he's really hard. I think he's really hard to create for now as well. I think to a large part because there's been so many great writers who've done some great things with it. But um, so where I think can be a problematic villain is getting that level of villainy right. So as we say, like he's done some really dark things, and let's be honest, even like the really dark things that probably go into our heads, millions of more dark things than that. Because if you kind of totted up his body count over the years, Jesus Christ, he's probably um, killed more people than certain wars have at this stage. And that's quite hard for me because I think it. I'm going to totter into the term sympathetic here. Um, I don't ever want to have any sympathy for him, and so I think his use a lot can become problematic because of that. Because what would often happen is I think it becomes a torture porn gore fest.
yeah. I see that there probably is that there as
In
well.
bad
Because
writers, I would say
yeah,
generally, like not saying that across, and I think that's where he's really uniquely hard because he has no redeeming features, does he?
no, he is there. There is nothing redeeming about him. It's like we said about it in the Bad Boys thingy one, where we were sort of going off about everyone going on with the Suicide Squad and oh how him and Harley are a great
Yeah, yeah,
relationship
yeah,
and model, that, and it's like no, it isn't. He's a cunt. But I think the problem is because of he has an iconic look. He has
yeah.
been
Spot
how
on.
he's
We said
been
that about Doctor
used.
Doom, but this guy has got one of the most iconic looks ever, hasn't he? Let's be
Yeah,
honest. There ain't many people on this planet that you could walk up to with a t-shirt of the Joker in any of the many guises, be it comic books or movies, and they wouldn't go, "Oh, that's the Joker." Most people
yeah.
know who the Joker is. Yeah.
That I think because of the level of exposure, because of the way that he is seen by the masses more than the people that read comics, he sits there in that Freddy and Jason
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you know Art the Clown sort of thing of
Written
killers that are
better than
fun.
any of them. Like at his best, he's a much better character than
Yeah,
those. Like he's had much greater sort of more skilled people on it. But yeah, yeah, there is parts of that to me. Is yeah, has he by proxy become a bit of an anti-hero? Even though I don't think generally he's written as one, and I do find that worrying and problematic. Now go back to what I said earlier on the honourable mentions. I love me a Nazi villain because they're quite clear, they're irredeemable. I think there's a different sort of irredeemable to them. You just go fundamentally, you're wrong.
you're wrong. Yeah,
Whereas Joker, sometimes I find that irredeemable to fall into the lines of. I mean, you said it earlier. The attractive nature of like the compelling point for Joker being he is, and fuck it, let's not avoid it. The one bad day. We could go that day with one bad day, and there being some appeal to that. And do you know what? There shouldn't be. Fundamentally, there shouldn't be any appeal to that because
yeah.
he's horrific. But there is, and I think human nature tells us that there is, and I think that that's where and don't get me wrong, I'm kind of going to argue both sides of the coin here. I think that's what makes him an amazingly compelling and a really really effective villain. It's also the side of it that I guess sometimes leaves me feeling worse about myself, and I don't necessarily want that, because sometimes I see the, oh yeah, wouldn't that be, and I go, no no it wouldn't. And I think he kind of has this attractive side to him that he falls down my list because I don't always want to read stories of him, but my god, do I want to read the brilliant ones.
Yeah. So
But yeah, an amazing villain, like absolutely amazing. I think he brings like he exists. I think the creation of him and the way that he's utilized is not as cut and dried and as appealing as some of the others are for me.
yes. So who tops your bad boys list?
The ventriloquist. No, it's not.
Yay!
I so wish it was a ventriloquist. He tops my villain list. For many of the reasons that we've said about all the other villains and specifically about this one earlier. It's Magneto. Magneto was right. Magneto was also fundamentally wrong. Magneto is both evil and not evil at the same time. He's both a villain and a hero at the same time. What makes him so compelling as a villain to me is that he his villainy, and I will fast forward a lot of years. Like, let's be honest, if we go back to early doors, and even back in some of the early doors stuff, there was more layers to him than maybe some of the other villains. But I think some of it's been explored a lot more as we get to like the 90s and onwards, and comic book writing really does. Oh, and sorry for that, Claremont and onwards, comic book writing really does evolve a lot into why people are doing what they're doing and their motivations. But um, his way would be the right way for a lot of people, and I don't have that icky feeling about that concept like I said about the Joker, because I can really see it. He is the Malcolm X to Professor Xavier's Martin Luther King, where one preaches the right way forward and the right way to solve any conflict is by peace and discussion. The other person has lived through a life where he saw what the worst that human beings could do to other human beings just because of their religion. That no, he doesn't trust people to do that. And even over the course of history, when he's had periods where he's moved a little bit more to Xavier's message, what more often than not has happened is that the human race has let him down, and albeit in some cases just a small amount of people doing the thing that he has always convinced himself they would do, they have done it. And that's what I think I want in my villain. That's my key to being a top villain for me is um I want to have to think about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and ask myself serious questions to myself of, are they a villain or are they not a villain? Are they right? Are they not right? Touched on it briefly when the Doctor Doom one. Doctor Doom, a lot of what he does is because he's the leader of a nation. Is it
Mm.
villainy? Isn't it villainy? In this, for many many years, mutants in the Marvel universe were treated and have been treated like lesser beings. Um, why wouldn't you fight back? But as much as I think he is right, and I go Magneto is right, and it's exactly what you said earlier. Is it the right way to react though? And I think probably the truth of it is for me, a lot of my body wants to go, no, I would fight back, but I do want to be Professor Xavier. I do want to be the person that goes, no, the right way to find a peaceful resolution. So the right way is to find a peaceful resolution. The way to stop people from hating and unnecessarily hating is to greet that with love, not with anger, hate, and violence. But my God, I want to read a story about it, and I want to see Magneto do that. And I don't want him to just be biffed on the chin by the good guys. I probably want those stories to have a broader scope, a broader endpoint, and maybe for the people that he touches in the story. So X-Men often, I want the X-Men to be walking away afterwards and maybe asking them those similar questions that I should be asking myself as an audience. Hats off to lots of creators for what they've contributed along the way to Magneto. And we said this, and it's quite. I think the Governor was probably the most modern one. I think nearly everyone we've done has had at least 50-year kind of history. Oh, I guess
Yeah.
Venom was kind of the 80s, but that's still a long time ago now. Um, but yeah, hats off to people not only creating villains that were compelling to begin with, that had enough scope in them for people to build further stories out of, but for them to not seem generic, staid, and repetitive all these years later.
Or dated as well. That's
Yeah,
the thing.
yeah,
There's
and
something like Magneto could have dated quite easily because as we know, it was of the time of the civil rights and say King and Malcolm X.
yeah,
But you know, we live in a society in a world where that shit hasn't changed in 60 years. Yeah,
yeah,
we might think that we know better and are better because they don't have segregation in the states, but racism's still there. These things
yeah.
still. These world events that they're telling us the moral story of, but as mutants and not humans,
Yeah,
it still is. It still resonates because people are still shit.
on
So
some degree of the scale, isn't it? Like, be it the the what we've seen, but even if it comes down to a much smaller thing, so like I don't know, there's three people in a room. One person doesn't like one person doesn't like the other one. One's playing peacemaker, whatever. I think no matter what, there's always, and you look at kids in the playground, like it. I think that's probably strange enough one of the really God, this is a horrible thing to say, but one of the pure times where they're probably less likely to be racist, but they're still going to be fucking horrible to other kids about something.
yeah,
Like it's going to be some sort of a difference, and yeah, I think I don't know whether we ever evolve beyond that as a race, a species. I think there's in those early years of learning always this looking for difference and probably a safety mechanism of going, if I point at someone else, no one's going to point at me, and that's when I'm at my safest.
yeah,
But no matter what it is, I think this becomes a compelling story because there are always going to be these, I guess, polar opposite ways of dealing with that, aren't they? The person who kind of goes, well, and let's go to just straight up bullying. I am going to try and win over the bully, or win over is probably one word. I'm going to show the bully the kindness that he probably never had, which has made him be a bully, or I'm going to kick that bully square in the nuts and he'll never bully me again. And
yeah.
there's such a kind of a base human dilemma that everyone will react differently to. And yeah, just amazing to have that as a story concept.
Yes. So
Beautiful red costume as well. Lovely
yes,
helmet.
yes. So
Helmeted for my top two, I noticed.
yeah.
Clearly love a helmet. Both had capes as well. So I don't know whether what that says about me. I clearly resonate with a caped, helmeted villain.
So if you've made your way all the way through to our top fives, well done. Down there, let us know yours. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that other YouTubey things. And until next time, goodbye.